Many of us remember the good old days when anyone arriving at Ben Gurion Airport walked right off the plane, down that long flight of stairs, and onto the tarmac where we could kiss the ground. Although I love the new airport, it's not so new anymore, with all of its amenities and contemporary style, I do miss those days when I didn't have to wait so long from the time that I landed to the time that I actually got to step out onto the soil of the Holy Land. Perhaps my most vivid and perhaps my most special memory of my first trip to Israel in 1997 was taking my first steps on the ground of the Holy Land, walking slightly off to the side after descending the steps so that no one would trample me as I bent down to kiss the ground. It was a scene I had played out in my mind countless times and had longed for, and one that I felt so fortunate to fulfill. Kissing the ground of Israel is not a modern custom or some practice introduced by sentimental Zionist pioneers of the 19th and 20th century, but actually a custom that dates back to the sages of the Gemara. The Gemara in Ksubis, the very end of Ksubis, says, Rabbi Abba Menashe kipiv de Akko. Rabbi Abba would kiss the stones of Akko. Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, Megander ba'afra. Rabbi Chia bar Gamda used to roll around in the dust of the land of Israel. Despite their great standing and stature, and despite their desire to spend all their time in this Beis Medrash, in the halls of the Beis Medrash, learning Torah, each of these sages spent time physically engaging with the land. It's an expression of their love. In the case of Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Chia, they would actually get right down low and kiss the stones of the ground and roll around in the dust, just like we get down and kiss the ground until this very day. Can you imagine Rabbi Chia rolling around in the dust? Rabbi Abba kissing stones on the floor as if he were kissing a Torah or a Sefer? Must have been quite the scene to behold. As the end of the Gemara notes, the practice of these sages was based on a pasuk in Tehillim, in which David HaMelech describes these kinds of actions as the prime expression of love for the land and actually the impetus for our redemption. The pasuk says, "Ata takum terachem Tzion ki eis lechanana kiva moed." You're going to arise, Hashem, and have compassion on Tzion, because it's time to be gracious to her. It's time to give her chen kiva moed. It's the time. The time has come to rebuild her, to raise her up. Why? Says the next pasuk. Ki ratzu avadecha es avaneha, ves afara yichonenu. Because your servants take pleasure in its stones. They love her dust. That's the pasuk. The Gemara quotes to support the behavior of Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Chia. Ki ratzu avadecha es avaneha, ves afara yichonenu. Your servants are so in love with the land. They are so overwhelmed by their passionate love for the land that they would give anything just to kiss its stones, to roll around in the dust, even though they wouldn't do that in any other place on earth. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi uses this powerful image to end off his entire work of the Kuzari. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was, of course, a tremendous lover of Israel, as embodied by the words of his poem in which he longs for Israel from the diaspora and says, Libi b'mizrach v'ani b'sof ma'arav. My heart is in the east, my heart is in Israel, even though anochi b'sof ma'arav, even though I'm all the way in the west. His love of Israel was embodied by the difficult journey he endured to reach the shores of Israel in 1141. He ends his imaginary conversation with the king of the Khazars by quoting this pasuk in Tehillim. And after quoting it, he explains what the pasuk means. Rotze loma, ki Yerushalayim omnam tibaneh, kisheyichasfu b'nei Yisrael la tachlis hakosef, ad sheyechonenu avaneha ve'afara. Yerushalayim will be rebuilt when the Jewish people longs so much for that land, the ideal of all longing, to the point where they love her stones and her dust. They will merit the redemption. While the whole concept of this pasuk and the practice over generations that it engendered of kissing the ground, of kissing the stones, is beautiful and one that very much resonates with me. I've often wondered why David HaMelech used the specific symbols of dust and stones as the objects of the land that we're supposed to love. What's the meaning or symbolism of these two items, and how are they supposed to inform the depth of love that we're meant to have for the land? Rav Kook explains that there are two motivations for loving the land of Israel. Israel as a means to an end, and Israel as an end in and of itself. We can love the land for extrinsic reasons or intrinsic reasons. We can love the land for what it provides us, or we can love the land for the land itself. We can come to love the land of Israel extrinsically because of the functional benefits, both spiritual and physical, that it affords us. Many thinkers over the centuries, even up to modern times, have viewed the land of Israel as a place that could be helpful to us in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons. Herzl, in his early writings, spoke of the land as a safe haven for Jews, could protect them from the discrimination he saw manifest at the Dreyfus trial. Even Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Reines, the religious Zionist thinker who founded the Mizrahi movement in Europe, who certainly ascribed to loftier, more religious, spiritual, moral reasons for loving Israel, also explained the need to love Israel because it would serve the practical need of saving Jews from the travails of exilic life. Most of us today, many of us today, value the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel because, amongst many other reasons, it caused the growth of Torah. It's yielded so much Torah learning. It's enabled us to fulfill many mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz for the first time. Many mitzvos that are dependent upon the land, trumos, maasros, shmita, all of these mitzvos that have been neglected for centuries. There's nothing wrong in loving the land of Israel as a means towards all of these ends and more. However, if it were the only reason to love Israel, if we were only to view the land as a means to an end, then we would have missed the crux of what is so special about the land of Israel and the land itself. As Rav Kook says, Eretz Yisrael, enena davar chitzoni, kinyan chitzoni la'umah, rak betur imtza'i lematara. Eretz Yisrael cannot be viewed as something external to us, something extrinsic to us, which can be viewed simply as an emtza'i lamatara, as a means towards some other end. Whether that end is his agdut haklalit, our unification, or hachzakat kiyuma, the strengthening of our existence, either hachomri or afilu haruchani, whether spiritual or physical, it can't only be viewed as a means towards those ends, as something extrinsically valuable. But in addition to the extrinsic love that we feel, we also need to fall in love with the land itself for its own sake and recognize its amazing holiness and inherent value, even if it never did anything else for us. In Einayah, Rav Kook's commentary in the Gemara in Brachos, he relates these two forms of love, two motivations for loving the land, to the love of the dust and the stones mentioned in our pasuk in Tehillim, quoted by the Gemara. His son Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook explains that the dust, the dirt, the earth, is a part of the land where things can grow and give forth fruit and produce and plants. That dust represents the facet of the land that can help lead to other tangential benefits and symbolizes our love of Israel as a means to an end. On the other hand, the stones cannot produce anything and symbolize our pure, altruistic, and unadulterated love of the land, not as a means to an end, but as an end in and of itself. As we reflect upon the celebration of Yom Haatzmaut just yesterday, and the celebration of Hei B'Iyar, the calendar date of the founding of the State of Israel, which occurs tomorrow, perhaps we can frame our celebration of these special days and of our incredible appreciation for the gift and the miracle of the State of Israel through the lens of love of both dust and stones. Many of us fall in love for the first time with the land and the concept of the State of Israel because we love its dust. We love all of what it gives us, what it provides us, what it can do for us, where it can lead us. We love Israel because it enables us as Jews to feel proud of who we are, to feel protected no matter where we are on the face of the earth. We love Israel because of its great scenery, its beauty, its hikes, its beaches. We love Israel because of its amazing kosher food and wine. We love Israel because of its archaeology and historical connection to our people. We love Israel because of its culture, its revival of the Hebrew language. We love Israel because of its great rabbis and yeshivas and seminaries and Torah learning. We love Israel because it's a place where we can meet Jews of all colors and stripes and backgrounds and languages. We love Israel because of its ingenuity and technological advancement and high-tech industry and military prowess and all of what comes by being the startup nation. These are all great reasons to love the land of Israel. These are all natural reasons to love the land and the state of Israel. These are all reasons why we should continue to love the land and continue to support the land and continue to protect the land. These are areas of love for the dust of the land that we should expand upon and work on and foster into the future in the strongest of ways. But this year, let us also try to engender within ourselves an even higher level of love for the land. The love, not of its dust, but of its stones. The love for the holiness of the land as an end in and of itself. Let us try to love it simply because it's a place Hashem chose. It's a place Hashem watches over. It's a place imbued with more sanctity than anywhere else on earth. It's a place where Hashem is felt in the very air we breathe. It's a place that is ours. Let us learn how to rise to the level of being able to love Israel for itself. This is a love that, I'll admit, is much harder to grasp and much harder to cultivate. Many of us, perhaps, felt this kind of love and attachment at different times, even if we were unable to explain it. It's perhaps the love that makes us feel totally at home in Israel, even though we know no one else. It's perhaps this kind of love that makes us want to bend down and kiss the stones rather than running to the nearest kosher McDonald's or even to the nearest base medrash. It's perhaps this love that makes our hearts pound and our eyes well up with tears even before we've experienced any of what Israel has to offer us, even before we've tasted the first falafel or swam in the first beach. I truly believe we have all felt this kind of altruistic, pure love for Israel. The pure love of the holiness of the land itself, even if we've not thought about it in this exact way. By thinking of our love of Israel this Yom Haatzmaut through the prism of this pasuk in Tehillim, through the prism of stones and dust, through the prism of extrinsic and intrinsic love, we can perhaps reach even higher levels of appreciation for this amazing land and for the miracle of our return. May Hashem bless us and bless the state of Israel with peace and with prosperity and with wisdom and with direction. May we be able to see the full flowering of our redemption very soon in our days, and may we be able to roll around in its dust and kiss its stones even sooner than that. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Yom Haatzmaut Sameach.